Welcome to Amazing Stories. Today's story is going to blow your mind. What terrible secrets are hiding behind one of the most infamous men in history? For years and years, news reporters and movie makers have tried to figure him out. But today, we're diving into a different side of the story, a really unique view that's been kept quiet for over 20 years. Imagine getting to know the man behind the myth, not from the newspaper headlines, but through the eyes of the person who shared his blood and his life with him. What was Pablo Escobar really like at home, away from the war and the terror he started? What hidden truths and never-before-told details are hiding in the memories of a son who didn't choose his fate, but who now has the courage to dig up a personal story with many different sides to it? Get ready for a trip deep into a life marked by too much of everything and violence, but also by a father's love that doesn't make any sense. Can you find good in someone the world thinks is a monster? And what if a lot of what we think we know about what happened in Colombia is now being questioned? Stay tuned on Unbelievable Stories, because we're about to open a book that promises much more than just a simple life story. It's a personal search for answers to questions that have haunted a family and a whole country. The Betrayal, December 1993. Just 2 weeks after Pablo Escobar died, his family held and watched on the 29th floor of the Tequendama Residence's Apart Hotel in Bogota, heard news. Roberto Escobar, Pablo's brother, was hit by a letter bomb in Itagüí prison. Roberto got badly hurt in his eyes and stomach. The family decided to move him to the Central Military Hospital in Bogota. It was a place with better technology and more safety. Juan Pablo's mom, Victoria, paid the $3,000 for the air ambulance. Juan Pablo visited him with his uncle Fernando, his mum's brother. He noticed something that gave him a bad feeling. The CTI agents protecting them were replaced by men from SIGIN, the police intelligence service. This made him feel very uneasy. At the hospital, a doctor said Roberto would need to have both eyes removed, but his family refused. They asked the doctor to do everything possible to save his sight. When Roberto woke up a bit, still groggy from the medicine, Juan Pablo was worried for his mum, his sister, and himself. He asked Roberto if his father had a hidden helicopter for them to escape. Roberto mysteriously asked for paper and a pen. He told Juan Pablo to write down AAA and go to the US Embassy, saying Roberto had sent him. Juan Pablo got more and more paranoid when the doctor who did Roberto's surgery told him he couldn't leave the hospital because his security guards hadn't arrived yet. And the weird part was, the doctor wasn't even supposed to know about his security. Convinced it was a plot to kill him, Juan Pablo insisted on leaving, and finally he got the doctor to sign the papers so he could leave the hospital. The next day, Juan Pablo and his uncle Fernando went to the American embassy. After a tense argument with the official in charge of his security detail, who refused to go with them, they decided to skip the protection and just took a taxi. When they got to the embassy and showed a card with the 3 letters AAA on it, they were let in really fast, without the usual security checks. Joe Toft, the DEA director for Latin America, met him and asked why he was visiting. Juan Pablo asked for help and said that his uncle Roberto had sent him. Toft answered bluntly. He said his government couldn't promise to help him, but he could recommend a judge in the United States if Juan Pablo in return gave them information from his father's files. Juan Pablo replied that when his father died, those files, which were mostly just in his father's memory, died with him. And as for any information about enemies his father had written in his notebooks, the Colombian police already had all of that. The meeting didn't really make their tough situation any better, but it did show that his uncle Roberto knew some important people in the US. The same people who had put a reward out for his father and were actively trying to catch him. This made Juan Pablo start to worry that maybe Roberto, the United States, and Los Pepes were all working together to get his father. He remembered when his cousin Nicolas, Roberto's son, was kidnapped back in May 1993. Who was let go just a few hours later, completely unharmed, something that with how things were in that war was pretty much a death sentence. And now that started to mean something new to him. It seemed like proof of this deal came in August 1994, when his aunt, Alba Marina Escobar, visited them at Hacienda Napoles with a really important message from Roberto. She told them they had a chance to get visas for the US, but only if they wrote a book. In the book, they had to mention his father and Vladimiro Montesinos, who was Fujimori's intelligence chief in Peru. They also had to claim they saw the two of them together at Napoles. Juan Pablo and his mother refused to lie. A little later, they found out that his grandma Hermilda and his aunt Alba Marina were just taking a nice walk around New York City, even though their visas were supposedly cancelled. Years later, Cambio magazine published an interview. In it, Roberto Escobar claimed his brother Pablo had given $1 million to Fujimori's campaign through Montesinos, and later Roberto published the book, My Brother Pablo. He wrote all about these supposed connections in detail, but he didn't offer any real proof. Finally, in 2013, a journalist from another country confirmed to Juan Pablo what he had suspected for a very, very long time. Former DEA agents confessed to him that his uncle Roberto was directly involved in killing Pablo Escobar. Pretty soon, the fear of running out of money started to creep in. The first hotel bill was huge because it included the cost for the government security guards who were watching them. It was a crazy big amount and they paid it, but they were getting really worried. Right when things were really tough, Juan Pablo's aunt, Alba Marina, came to visit with her family. She seemed really nice and generous, so Juan Pablo told her a secret. His dad had hidden a lot of dollars in 2 spots in the Blue House. He asked her to get it. He whispered all the details to her with the TV turned up really loud so no hidden microphones could hear them. And he explained that his dad said this money would be enough to win the war and help them get their money situation sorted out. He also mentioned that his dad had given Roberto $6 million, $3 million for Roberto's expenses in jail and $3 million for Roberto to keep safe for the family. Alba Marina accepted the mission and came back 3 days later looking very serious. She said that at El Gordo's house, he was the one guarding the hiding spot. She only found a few dollars. At first, Juan Pablo took his anger out on El Gordo. Their money problems got even worse. They decided to ask their uncles and aunts about the $3 million that Pablo Escobar had given to Roberto for them. Grandma Hermilda and Aunts Gloria, Alba Marina, and Luz Maria, along with Uncle Argemiro, showed some rough accounts. These showed how Roberto had spent 75% of the money on things like setting up Gloria's apartment, a taxi for her, and other costs for Grandpa Abel, plus money for upkeep. Juan Pablo questioned the spending, especially for the furniture. It seemed like it cost more than the apartment itself, but the uncles and aunts got irritated. To avoid more problems with his father's old friends who were in jail and were asking for help, they asked Roberto to use the money that was left to help them out, and they thought it would last for about a year. But soon, word got around that Grandma Hermilda was telling the prisoners Roberto was paying the money from his own pocket, so Juan Pablo had to write letters to the jails to set things straight. Roberto said the money only lasted for 5 months. He also got a fax from some prisoners in Itagüí. They accused Roberto of trying to trick Juan Pablo into some criminal plans to collect money they said his father owed. It was a September night, 1994. El Gordo, the guard at the Blue House hideout, showed up at the apartment building where they lived. Juan Pablo, suspicious at first, let him come up. With tears in his eyes, El Gordo hugged Juan Pablo. He acted very humble and didn't look at all like someone who was supposed to have stolen a fortune. When Juan Pablo asked him about the money, El Gordo swore up and down that Alba Marina had gotten all the boxes. The car was so packed full, you could clearly see how low the back of it was sitting. And he even offered to face her about it right then and there. Juan Pablo believed him. He stopped feeling suspicious and was now sure that his aunt had betrayed them. Hacienda Napoles was, no doubt, the most important place for Pablo Escobar. He wanted to be buried there, under a chiba tree, and he didn't want anyone to ever visit him because he thought his body was just a simple tool for his time on Earth. So, way back in early 1978, he ended up in this place called Magdalena Medio in the Antioquia area. He'd been searching for a long time for a place that had jungle, water and mountains all together. Then, an ad in the El Colombiano newspaper took him to a town called Puerto Triunfo. There, after a pretty wild motorcycle ride with Gustavo Gaviria, he met this guy, Jorge Tulio Garces. Now, this Garces was an old rival from his neighborhood, and he owned one of the properties there. Even though this property wasn't really for sale, Escobar bought Hacienda Valdupa, which was 800 hectares big, and another smaller place right next door, making a total area of almost 3,000 hectares. And just like that, Hacienda Napoles was born. The transformation of Napoles was spectacular. They built guest houses, swimming pools, a giant bar with arcade games from the 80s, and they planted thousands of fruit trees. They even moved big, grown trees with a giant crane. The pantries were like warehouses, and there were always tons of goodies for the guests. Even before Steven Spielberg made the movie Jurassic Park, Escobar had already built life-size dinosaurs and a mammoth on his land. The pair of black parrots just cost $400,000, and a blue parrot, a one-of-a-kind, was smuggled in from Brazil for $100,000. Even pink river dolphins from the Amazon were brought in. The entrance gate to the Napoles estate had its name written in giant white letters, and sitting right on top of it was a Piper PA-18 airplane with the registration number HK617. Now, the story was that Escobar used this plane to fly his very first load of cocaine, but really it was just an old plane that had crashed and been fixed up. And it didn't even have an engine. There was another story about a car they had on display, one that was all shot up with bullet holes. They said it was Bonnie and Clyde's car, but the truth is it was made from different car parts. Part of it was a Toyota that Escobar's brother, Fernando, died in when it crashed, and another part was a Ford from 1936. Escobar himself had someone shoot holes in it to copy the 167 bullet holes in the real gangster's car. Napoles opened up to the public, and it was completely free to get in. On long weekends, you could see up to 25,000 cars streaming in. Escobar really loved watching the ordinary folks enjoy the whole show, but there were problems getting the giraffes settled, and sadly, they didn't make it. And feeding the flamingos and elephants also turned out to be a challenge. Juan Pablo remembers a day his dad had him shoot a wounded deer with his Sig Sauer pistol. The property was even used to film a Naranja Postobon commercial in 1983. At Christmas, helicopters would hand out gifts and food in the nearby villages. But Napoles was also the center of Escobar's criminal activities. Cartel members like El Mexicano, Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, and Carlos Leta were always around. Leta got into a big fight where he killed Rolo, one of Escobar's main hitmen, all over a woman, and that got him kicked off the property. Alberto Prieto, El Padrino, or the Godfather, was the only boss Escobar ever had in his life. He was also a special guest there. Napoles was also a training camp for Escobar's army of hitmen. In 1988, he hired Yair Klein, a soldier for hire from Israel, also known as Give or Yair. Yair was there to teach Escobar's men how to stay safe, protect others, and fight. Some of these men were the deadly Munoz Mosquera brothers, Tyson and Tilton. Chucho, who knew a lot about bombs and was trained by a terrorist from Spain, also used the airstrip at Napoles to test out car bombs. Even though the police raided the place many times, Escobar always managed to stay there. It was his own paradise and the main spot for all his criminal business. Juan Pablo Escobar says he often asked his dad how much money he had, an amount that Forbes magazine guessed was $3 billion, but his dad would just say that at some point he had so much money he lost count. For Juan Pablo, the drug business gave his dad everything, and it also took everything away, including his life. This made him wonder if that business was really worth it in the long run. After he got out of Pasto prison in September 1976, Pablo Escobar met with Alfredo Hard. and after a secret phone call, he got a brand new Toyota SUV and $200,000 in cash. This showed that his time in jail didn't make him any less set on getting rich illegally. Even though they hit a bump in the road when the Risaralda police found hidden dollar bills in a car, Escobar and Gustavo Gaviria didn't let that stop them. They got in touch with smugglers they had met in prison to make their supply network and the routes for coca paste from Ecuador even better. They set up a system for bigger and bigger loads, which day workers carried through the jungle all the way to the San Miguel River. From there, trucks took it to the drug kitchens in eastern Antioquia. So, around mid-1977, Escobar and Gaviria found their own ways to sneak cocaine into the US, and they took advantage of the easy security checks at airports and seaports. A first shipment of 100 kilos, using a twin-engine Piper Seneca, landed easily at Opa-locka Airport in Miami, and that was the start of a real gold mine for them. 1 kilo, made in Colombia for about $5,000, sold for $20,000 wholesale in Miami and in New York, even up to $30,000. But Escobar himself only got about 10% of that final price because the rest went to the American dealers who would then mix the drugs with other things. The business grew really fast, with suppliers in Alto Hualaga in Peru and then skilled pilots showed up who made it possible to fly big loads of coca paste. Fidel Castano joined in and brought contacts from Bolivia, and so they started to fly in loads of 300 to 500 kilos. Back then, the United States was full of holes like Swiss cheese, with no real checks, which let the Colombian narcos split up the territory among themselves. Medellin, with Escobar, Rodriguez Gacha, and the Ochoa brothers, grabbed South Florida, while Cali, with the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, Pacho Herrera and Chepe Santa Cruz, focused on New York. The Opa-locka Airport played a key part, getting fully loaded flights 2 or 3 times a week. Carlos Lerda joined in with his private island in the Bahamas. The El Platanal route used banana boats to sneak in up to 800 kilos of cocaine. So, Escobar was also in Miami. He stayed at the Omni Hotel there and threw parties for the American dealers. He'd give them the cocaine right in the trunks of brand new cars. His shipments were marked with gemstone seals like diamond and emerald, even though his cocaine was known for being pretty bad quality, totally different from the stuff from El Mexicano, Reina, or Kiko Moncada. New routes were made, like Las Cebollas that went through Mexico, working with Leonidas Vargas in Colombia and Amado Carrillo Fuentes in Mexico. They also started dropping cocaine packages into the ocean near Miami or in the Everglades. Escobar even came up with a way to soak jeans with cocaine so he could send them out legally. Pablo Escobar, a name that was going to stand for power and shame, started his journey from humble beginnings in Rio Negro, Colombia. By the late 1970s, he had already made a name for himself in the world of crime, but it was his start in the cocaine business that truly marked Escobar's rise. As his business grew, the Medellin cartel was formed, and that kicked off a new age of drug trafficking. Escobar's ambition had no limits, and soon he would become one of the most powerful men in the world. His office was totally swamped with people. Everyone wanted a piece of the action, from shoe shiners to businessmen and even politicians. In 1981, he bought a huge mansion in Miami Beach for $700,000. He also got several apartments for millions more. And he actually told customs about all this money officially. As he got richer and more powerful, he hired his first bodyguards, La Yuca, Pasarela, and Mugre. Naples became a major hub for the drug business. Planes loaded with cocaine would take off from there at night, flying to all sorts of different places. Escobar came up with some really clever ways to get away from the police, like an airstrip that was hidden by a mobile home. People whispered that he smuggled drugs through Cuba with help from powerful people in Castro's government. A plan that reportedly worked for 2 years until it got busted in 1989. Eventually, Escobar stopped making coca paste himself and just focused on moving it. making him one of the biggest cocaine movers around. At the end of 1981, when he was already number one, the most powerful guy, he told Gustavo Gaviria, VO, "We've got tons of money now, and all the stuff we need. Now, we want the power to be in charge, political power." In April 1983, the magazine Semana wrote Pablo Escobar was like a hometown Robin Hood. They talked about how much he helped poor people and all his money that came from who knows where. Escobar was at the top of his game, a multi-millionaire. He owned his dream ranch, Napoles, a congressman with no court cases against him, and his drug business was doing great. He made a sarcastic comment about the article, but secretly he was already making a plan against the new liberalism group because they had pushed him aside. His target was Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, who was Luis Carlos Galen's right-hand man back then. Escobar told Evaristo Porras to act like a businessman so he could meet with Lara, give him a check for 1 million pesos and record their talk. But the recording didn't work out, but the check was left behind as proof. When President Betancourt made Lara Bonilla the Minister of Justice, he went after the cartels really hard, especially Escobar. Escobar fought back in Congress, showed the check, and put Lara in a tough spot. But on August 25th, the El Espectador newspaper published a story that reminded everyone that Escobar had been arrested back in 1976 for dealing coca paste, which was a big blow to his image with the public and his political career. Escobar was furious, and he tried to buy up all the copies of the newspaper in Medellin, but it was no use. Things got even more heated when a judge started looking again into the deaths of the DAS agents who had arrested him years before. The US Embassy took away his visa, and the Chamber of Representatives took away his special protection from the law. On January 20th, 1984, Escobar quit politics. A little later, on March 12, 1984, Minister Lara and Colonel Jaime Ramirez hit the Medellin cartel hard when they took down Tranquilandia. This was a giant place for making cocaine, hidden deep in the Yari jungles. At first, Juan Pablo Escobar thought Tranquilandia belonged to his dad, but later, when he was writing his book, he found out it really belonged to other drug dealers who worked with his dad. He also learned that his dad was actually tired of those labs because there were so many accidents and they cost a lot of money. Escobar was sure that Lara wouldn't stop his attacks, so he ordered him to be killed. After a few failed tries with an ambulance they had set up, the plan was changed and beefed up with 2 hitmen on motorcycles, Byron Velázquez and Ivan Dario Guisao, hired by Pinina. On the night of April 30th, 1984, Guisao filled Minister Lara with bullets in Bogotá. This crime kicked off a full-blown war by the government against the drug trade, which included hunting down the drug lords and the looming threat of extradition. The Escobar family fled to Panama, where Pablo already had connections with General Manuel Antonio Noriega, who he knew from before. Pablo had paid him $5 million back in 1981 to let his drug operations run smoothly, even though Noriega only partly stuck to their agreement later on. In Panama, on May 25, 1984, Manuela, Juan Pablo's sister, was born. Meanwhile, Escobar tried to make a deal with the Colombian government. He got help from former President Alfonso López Michelsen. He offered to shut down his drug business. In return, he asked not to be sent to another country for his crimes and to serve reasonable jail time in Colombia. The Attorney General, Carlos Jiménez Gómez, traveled to Panama to listen to this proposal. But sadly, information about the meeting leaked to the press, and that put a stop to any progress. Escobar was worried Noriega would turn him in, and he knew the US was on his tail, so he decided to hide out in Nicaragua. He knew some people in the M19 group and the Sandinista government there. They agreed to give him a safe place to stay if he helped them out with money. And they even let him use the country as a home base for his drug business. His family settled into a house in Managua, but life there was really tough because of the civil war and all the shortages. Escobar and El Mexicano were checking out routes, and they used the Los Brasiles airport to ship cocaine. But then they got betrayed by Barry Seal, who was a pilot and a DEA informant. He took pictures of a shipment. This got Escobar and the Sandinista regime in trouble. This scandal forced him to leave Nicaragua and return to Colombia to live there on the run at the end of 1984. The thought of being sent to another country for trial was still his biggest worry. Later, he'd get to know the prison. 3 days after he got to La Catedral in June 1991, Pablo Escobar called his son Juan Pablo, who was in New York. He asked him to get him about 25 to 30 warm jackets, because it was really cold in the prison. He told him everything was okay and that the usual guys were taking care of him. Juan Pablo was with some family members and friends on a long trip in the United States. He bought the jackets and a bunch of other gifts for his dad, including the whole James Bond collection on VHS tapes, and even some really cool spy stuff like tiny microphones and special cameras. He was fascinated by this tech, which reminded him of Agent 007's cool gadgets. Back in Medellin, Juan Pablo noticed things were different. They didn't have to hide as much anymore. He could visit his dad at La Catedral, which looked more like a fancy house than a jail. Escobar's men were in charge of the entrance, and the truck that brought visitors in had a secret floor. When he got there, his dad greeted him with a smile, and he was wearing a white ruana. A lot of the guards were really his own bodyguards. Some of the prisoners were like just extras, guys who weren't really important in his group. The government sent 5 inspectors from Bogotá to keep an eye on Pablo, and guess what? They had been paid off too to keep quiet. Shush. Juan Pablo quickly realized his father had no intention of giving up his criminal ways. La Catedral was the main place to get his armed group organized again, manage the drug routes, and keep on with kidnappings and extortions. The prison had pool tables, ping pong tables, and a dining room, but they almost never used it because it was really cold in there. They liked it better when 3 private chefs brought them their food. And there was a medical clinic run by Eugenio, who was the old doctor from Hacienda Napoles. There was a big balcony with telescopes that let him watch Medellin super clearly. Escobar's cell was cold at first, so it got a makeover. Then they built a new, bigger cell with a much better view, which his wife Victoria designed. This new cell had a living room, a dining room and a kitchen, a bedroom with a view of the city, a bathroom with a steam room and a walk-in closet, and a secret hiding spot for money and weapons. There was also a bar with a giant hot tub for 20 people, but they hardly ever used it because it was so cold. At La Catedral, life included exciting soccer games on a field that Escobar himself built and paid for. It even had professional lights and a great drainage system. Professional players like René Higuita, Leonel Alvarez, and Faustino Asprilla would come up to play, and you guessed it, the games only ended when Escobar's team won. They raised trout in a little pond and kept carrier pigeons in a pigeon house that Mugre built. Rough jokes and pranks were pretty common, like the time they played a prank on Roberto Escobar, Pablo's brother, where they made him think his wife had found some lady's underwear in his shower. So when it was time for one of those faceless prosecutors to ask Escobar where his money came from, the questioning happened in a house outside the prison, specially set up for it. Escobar, of course, denied everything and said he was in the cattle business. And when the lawyers asked him about cattle prices, Pablo said he had a really bad headache and just left. And that's how he basically made fun of the justice system. In December 1991, they celebrated at La Catedral, and Juan Pablo got a Honda CR 125 motorcycle as a Christmas present. Soon after, someone tried to kidnap Juan Pablo during a car race, but his father found out just in time and stopped it. For safety reasons, he had to stay in La Catedral for almost 20 days. During this time, Fidel Castano, the paramilitary guy nicknamed Rambo, moved into La Catedral. He slept in a room next to Escobar's until Escobar started to think that he was spying on him, which was the start of them growing apart. Escobar's relationship with Kiko Moncada, one of his business partners, seemed like they were good buddies, and they trusted each other with money. Moncada had loaned Escobar a lot of money for the war. One time at La Catedral, Moncada showed Escobar the books, which said he owed $23.5 million and offered him another $76 million. Escobar planned to pay him back soon after a deal in Mexico. But then, the news started talking about Moncada and Fernando Galeano maybe disappearing or even being killed at La Catedral. Juan Pablo was confused because he knew they were close friends, so he asked his dad what happened. Escobar told him that Kiko and Galeano had turned their backs on him. He said they teamed up with the Cali cartel, cut off his money and shared his secret plans. Because of this, some of his plans to fight his enemies didn't work out. Escobar said it was a tough decision, especially since Kiko was his friend, but he couldn't forgive them for turning on him. He also warned his son about Fidel Castano. He said Fidel was a traitor too. Things were getting tense. On July 21, 1992, strange army movements around La Catedral made Escobar worry they might move him. The Deputy Minister of Justice, Eduardo Mendoza, and the prison director, Colonel Hernando Navas, arrived to tell him the government's decision. Escobar refused and the officials were taken hostage. That night, as the army surrounded the prison, Escobar tied his sneakers, his sign that things were getting really serious. He ordered the lights off and escaped with 9 of his men through a weak spot they'd made in the prison wall. After Pablo Escobar's escape from La Catedral on July 21, 1992, his family, Juan Pablo, his mum Victoria, and his sister Manuela, were in a tough spot. 4 days later, Popeye picked them up to take them to the hideout where Escobar was hiding. A small house owned by Alvaro. Escobar, happy to see them, told them all about his escape and said he was mad about what the army was saying, that he had escaped, dressed like a woman. That very same night, he called a news reporter named Juan Gosain to say those stories weren't true and to see if he could talk with the government again. He wanted them to promise that he wouldn't be moved and that the police would stay out of it. Life on the run went on. Popeye couldn't stand being a prisoner again, so he asked Escobar if he could leave. Escobar said yes, but asked him for a few days to get himself reorganized. Angelito took Popeye's place. The hunt got more intense. The search block, a special group made to find Escobar, started taking out his men. Tyson and Palomo were taken down between October and November. But still, on December 1st, the family quietly celebrated Escobar's 43rd birthday. A few days later, on December 3rd, a car bomb went off near the Atanasio Girardot Stadium. It killed several police officers. This was a sign that Escobar was making his war against the government even stronger. On the night of December 7th, for a holiday called Day of the Little Candles, the family lit just 5 candles in the backyard. They felt very unsure about the future and were trying to hold on to a little bit of hope. With the danger getting bigger and rumors that people wanted to hurt his mum's side of the family, Escobar suggested to his family that they should separate from him. He suggested that his wife and kids should live in the Altos building, with the prosecutor's office protecting them, while he thought about joining the ELN in the jungle. On December 18th, during Christmas prayers at the Altos building, the search block police raided the building. There, they separated the men from the women and children. Juan Pablo was questioned and threatened, but the governor of Antioquia, Alvaro Villegas Moreno, who lived in the same building, stepped in. And later, someone from the prosecutor's office also helped, and that saved him from being arrested. 3 days later, a bodyguard told them that Escobar himself had carried out military actions to show he wasn't backed into a corner yet, like setting up roadblocks on the Via Las Palmas, and that he had blown up a house used by a police intelligence captain. The year 1993 started with a lot of violence. Escobar ordered more car bombs in Bogotá, which made Los Pepes show up publicly, who answered back by blowing up Grandma Hermilda's country house and attacked the buildings where the Escobar family lived. The family moved into an apartment on La Playa Avenue, where Escobar suggested to them that Juan Pablo, Manuela, and other family members could go to the USA. including Andrea, Juan Pablo's girlfriend. After Andrea's mum said it was okay, the trip to Miami was planned for February 18th. On the day they were leaving at the Rio Negro airport, even though they had all their papers in order, the police and some masked men who they thought were Los Pepes put them through a really careful and super slow check on purpose, which made them miss their flight. Juan Pablo, who was scared for their lives, managed to contact the Helicol airline and rent a helicopter to escape from that airport to the Olaya Herrera airport in Medellin. All of this happened right in front of reporters and with help from an official from the Attorney General's office who his security team had alerted. From there, and after a quick interview they did on the spot to buy some time, they escaped using an escape route they had planned before to another hiding spot, the attic of the Ceiba de Castilla building, and then to the apartment on La Playa Avenue, where Escobar was waiting for them. Things were still very tense. On February 20th, 1993, their visas to go to the United States were cancelled. To try and cheer them up, Escobar talked about finding a safe place in Europe, Asia or Australia, or even joining the ELN in the jungle. Giovanni Lopera, whose nickname was La Modelo and who took over after Pinina, turned himself in to the authorities. This was a big blow for Escobar. The Pepes started attacking even more and killed people who were close to Escobar, like the Londono White brothers and Hernan Dario Henao. Now, this Henao guy wasn't related to Victoria. The death of El Chopo, who was another one of his trusted guys, left Escobar pretty much all alone. The family was always moving from one hideout to another, from Belén Aguas Frias, which they called Aburilandia, to a house in Belén that looked out over the city, then to the Blue House. For 8 days they were stuck in a house right across from a police roadblock until they ran out of food and all they had left was some bad tripe soup. On September 18, 1993, Escobar said goodbye to his family, who were going to the Altos building to be protected by the Attorney General's office, as part of a new try to negotiate his surrender. In the Altos building, CTI agents were there to protect the family. Living there was really tense. Los Pepes kept attacking them, like with a shootout, and they even shot a rifle grenade at the building. Nariz, who was Juan Pablo's personal bodyguard, disappeared. People thought Los Pepes took him, and so did Albalia Londono, Manuela's teacher, and Nubia Jimenez, the nanny. Trebilin, another one of their bodyguards, got captured too. With all this danger, the prosecutor's office tried to use fake charges against Juan Pablo to stop him from leaving the country, but in the end they agreed the family could leave for Germany at the end of November. However, Germany wouldn't let them in because the Colombian government asked them to, and they were sent back to Bogotá, where they were put in the Residencias Tequendama under tight military guard. On December 2nd, 1993, Escobar called his son at the hotel several times. Juan Pablo was worried they could be traced, so he asked him to stop calling. During the last call, Escobar was giving answers for a list of questions from a news reporter named Jorge Lesmes when the call suddenly cut off. Just a few minutes later, Juan Pablo got the news. His dad had been shot and killed in Medellin. At first he was so angry he threatened to get revenge for his dad's death, but he quickly changed his mind and told everyone he didn't mean it. He decided to try and find peace and a good future for his family instead. The medical report said there were 3 gunshots and 1 was in his right ear. This made Juan Pablo feel even more sure that his dad had taken his own life, just like he promised he would, so he wouldn't be captured alive. And so we've come to the end of this story, a real and personal look taken from the pages of Pablo Escobar, my father. This is the story told by Juan Pablo Escobar, the son of the famous drug lord, who later took on the name Juan Sebastian Marroquin. What we've explored here is his effort to share a close-up view, full of details about his father's life and his own, things only he could know, a life that, as he says, he didn't choose. More than 20 years after Escobar's death, Juan Pablo, now Sebastian, felt he needed to share his side of the story, to show the strange ways of fatherly love that he saw while surrounded by too much of everything and terrible violence. His book, which took a lot of work and a process of growing up, thinking about himself and being humble, doesn't claim to be the whole truth, but it's his personal story, a way of looking at a person with his good and bad sides, told from the special view of a son who loved his father no matter what. It's the story of someone who lived right in the middle of a criminal empire, who saw it grow and then fall apart violently, and who, in the end, after his father died, chose a different path, looking for peace and a future for his family. Thanks so much for joining us for this incredible story, told by one of the people who lived it. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and as always, we love to hear your ideas. Until the next story that will amaze you all over again.